Across the ruins of Europe, church bells rang, rifles fired into the air, and banners proclaimed a day of liberation. For millions, it marked the end of 6 years of total war. But for a certain group of young women standing in the shadows of German railway yards, this day carried a different meaning. Their uniforms were worn remnants of the Wehrmacht auxiliaries, the Helferinnen. Their boots were cracked, their hair unwashed after weeks of retreat. Some were barely 20, their faces still holding traces of youth beneath layers of soot and exhaustion. They had been secretaries, typists, radio operators and nurses, small cogs in a vast military machine that had devoured their nation and then collapsed in their hands. Now, with the Reich shattered, they were herded into trains not for homecoming, but captivity. The sight was surreal. Lines of women in grey-green jackets dragging battered suitcases, stepping into dark wooden boxcars that had once carried soldiers to the front. Some clutched rosaries, others held ration tins, and some carried nothing at all. A girl from Hamburg whispered, "The Americans will not spare us, they will make examples." She had heard it from a Luftwaffe officer during the chaos of surrender. Another, older and hardened from manning anti-aircraft searchlights, said nothing, her jaw tight as if awaiting a blow. They had been told endlessly that the Allies, especially the Americans, were wolves, that capture meant degradation, cruelty, perhaps worse. The trains rumbled west through a landscape of ruins, charred towns drifting past like ghosts, churches without steeples, bridges crumpled into rivers, skeletal factories still smouldering. Children waved from embankments, their faces thin as paper. At night, when the train stopped, the women huddled for warmth, listening to guards' boots and distant gunfire. One woman, Anna, a secretary from Munich, wrote in her diary, "We are being taken far, none knows where. My mother will think I am dead. Perhaps I will be." The journey ended not in a German camp, but in the chaos of occupied ports, Bremen, Le Havre, Cherbourg, where American ships waited. The women were marched to the gangways past soldiers whose expressions were unreadable, some curious, others indifferent. They had expected insults and blows. Instead, there was paperwork, order, and lines. They were counted, tagged, divided into groups. It felt more like bureaucracy than vengeance. Yet as the ship's engines roared and Europe's coastline shrank, dread filled them. The Atlantic stretched wide and endless, and America, mysterious, distant, the land of their enemy, awaited. On board, seasickness took hold. The bunks were stacked in steel holds thick with diesel and salt. Food came on trays, bread, meat, mugs of steaming coffee. The women stared, disbelieving. For years they had survived on cabbage stalks, ersatz bread made from sawdust, and watery soup. Some hesitated, suspecting poison, others ate through tears, tasting real bread for the first time in years. "They feed us like they feed themselves," one whispered in astonishment. Kindness unsettled them more than cruelty would have. When the ships finally reached American ports, New York, Boston, New Orleans, the women gathered on deck, clutching rails, gazing at skylines untouched by war. The Statue of Liberty loomed, an irony without smiles. Crowds lined the piers, some jeering, some silent. The women were marched ashore under guard. The air smelled cleaner, salted but free of ash. For the first time they realized how completely their world had fallen. Germany was rubble, America was whole. Buses and trains carried them inland to POW camps, Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia, Camp Ruston in Louisiana, and others. Roads unfurled through green fields and tidy towns where children played and houses gleamed with white porches. To women who had watched their own cities burn, it felt unreal. They whispered, was this truly the land of monsters? The Reich had promised glory and left ruins. The enemy they were taught to hate lived in another world entirely. At the camp gates, names were recorded, belongings catalogued, uniforms exchanged for plain work clothes. Then came one more step. The guards, firm but not cruel, directed them into a building where steam hissed. It was a delousing station, though they didn't know it. Fear gripped them. They had been told this was where humiliation began. Whispers spread, "This is where they will make us suffer." But instead of cruelty, they were given bars of real soap, clean towels, fresh garments, and hot showers. Some women wept, others laughed. For the first time in years they were clean. Anna wrote again, "We were told we would be beaten, mocked, broken. Instead we were given soap. How can this be?" That night they lay in bunks, hair still damp, wrapped in blankets that smelled of starch. Outside, crickets hummed in the quiet American night. They whispered to each other, voices low with disbelief. Perhaps the enemy was not what they had been told. Perhaps something deeper existed beyond propaganda. Soon food, work, and encounters with Americans would astonish them even more. But one image lingered: the soap, slippery, fragrant, absurdly gentle. It was the beginning of captivity, yet also of something else. As dawn broke, a question hung over them. If the enemy could show such humanity, what else might lie ahead? The buses rolled through gates crowned with barbed wire, their engines rumbling as dust rose over the camp roads. The women looked out: guard towers, soldiers with rifles, rows of neat barracks. This was not the grey horror of a concentration camp, but something bewilderingly different. The wooden buildings were painted, the paths swept, the fences orderly. Silent glances passed among them. What world had they entered? When they were filed off the bus, each was handed a numbered tag. American officers moved briskly, stamping papers, giving calm orders. The women tensed for insults, but heard only quiet English tones, softened by drawls or Midwestern accents. The first shock came not from cruelty, but indifference. The Americans treated them not as monsters, nor as guests, but as ordinary prisoners to be managed and housed. The delousing had already shaken their fears. What came next would confound them even more. After the showers, they were led into a mess hall. The air was rich with the smell of coffee, fresh bread, and frying meat. They froze in the doorway, tables laden with food, trays of boiled potatoes, carrots, beef stew, and soft rolls glistening with butter. Steam fogged the windows, and the aroma, thick, warm, impossible, was their first taste of abundance. Onto tin plates the stew was poured, slices of bread were slid across, and mugs filled with steaming coffee. The women accepted their trays as if handling something dangerous. Some could not meet the cook's eyes, others simply stared at the food, unsure whether it was real. In Germany, the last winter of war had reduced meals to sawdust bread, watery turnip soup, and scraps of horse meat, if one was lucky. Yet here, in the enemy's camp, they were given more in one meal than they had seen in weeks. Anna, her diary hidden safely under her mattress, sat at the long table, dipped her spoon into the stew, and watched the grease float on top, the meat glistening in the light. Tentatively, she tasted it. Her eyes widened, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as if ashamed. Around her, others hesitated before eating in silence, the only sounds the clinking of cutlery and the faint hum of the mess hall. Some began to weep quietly. One whispered, "My brothers starved in the snow, and here they feed us like this." It was not kindness their leaders had promised them, it was humiliation they expected. Yet humiliation never came. The guards paced slowly, expressionless, one young soldier even offering a crooked, almost nervous smile as he passed. The women had braced for cruelty, but this strange civility unsettled them far more. In the days that followed, life in the camp brought new shocks. Each morning began with a bell, breakfast, and assigned duties. Some women worked in kitchens, others in nearby fields, and some in laundries where American uniforms were washed and pressed. They were paid small wages in camp currency, money that could be spent at the canteen. There, on wooden shelves, lay chocolate bars, cigarettes, pencils, even lipstick. The women stood before these goods as if in a dream. A bar of chocolate felt miraculous, a tube of lipstick almost sacred. And yet here the enemy offered them freely, in exchange for labor. The irony stung. In Germany, their families scavenged through ruins, boiling weeds for soup. Letters arrived from home, tattered and faint with grief. One woman read aloud, "We live in the cellar now. The house is gone. We boil grass to eat. If you have anything, send it." Her hands trembled as she folded the paper. There was nothing she could send back, only words. With every passing day, the gulf between their devastated homeland and the strange abundance of the American camp grew wider. Some of the women began to feel a heavy shame. They were the defeated, yet they were being clothed, fed, and even paid by those they were taught to despise. The Reich had promised them honor but left them with hunger and ruins. America, the enemy, offered them warmth, food, and soap. That contradiction gnawed at their thoughts like guilt. At night they lay awake, listening to the soft chorus of crickets beyond the barracks, wondering what it all meant. A few refused to adjust, hoarding bread crusts beneath their pillows, convinced this generosity was a trick. Rumors spread, the food was drugged, the soap poisoned, yet day after day, nothing happened. No cruelty came, only the quiet rhythm of camp life. Their bodies filled out again, their skin cleared, the lice disappeared, Suspicion slowly gave way to reluctant acceptance. The Americans, too, watched with curiosity. Many guards had never seen German women before, only the monstrous figures from propaganda posters. Instead, they saw thin, weary girls, some barely older than their sisters back home. One soldier wrote in a letter, "They are not what we were told. They look at us as if waiting for a blow that never comes." And so a new kind of conflict began, not one fought with weapons but with perception. Each meal, each word, each small act of decency chipped away at the image the women had believed all their lives. The war had ended, but inside them another battle raged, a struggle between memory and reality, between propaganda and truth. Anna captured it in her diary. To be treated with dignity by those we were told were beasts, it is harder than hatred. Hatred is easy, dignity is unbearable. Her words echoed what many felt. They no longer feared cruelty. They feared the kindness that made them question everything. One evening, after a long day working in the fields, they marched back to camp beneath a sunset spilling gold across the horizon. The sky was vast, clean, and endless. The air smelled of cut grass and summer warmth. It was a simple scene, yet it struck them harder than the ruins they had left behind. Here was a land untouched by war, vibrant and alive. The Reich had turned to rubble. America remained whole. The women had survived the shock of capture, the soap, the food, but something deeper was taking root now. They were beginning to see that survival would not be their hardest challenge. The hardest part was realizing that the enemy might be far more human and far more powerful than they had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, a rhythm settled over their days. The morning bell, the meals, the work details, all blurring together. Time lost meaning. They were still captives, yet fed, clothed, and even paid. For women raised in a collapsing Reich, where loyalty had meant starvation, this reversal was disorienting. Anna, once a secretary in Munich, now worked in the camp laundry. The smell of soap and starch clung to her hands as she scrubbed American uniforms smooth. Each shirt bore the initials of men who had been her enemies, yet as she folded them neatly, she felt not hatred, but a strange sense of peace. Here was work that did not destroy, only sustained. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the polished steel of the wash drum and hardly recognized herself. Others were sent to work in the fields under guard, harvesting crops that fed both prisoners and soldiers. They felt the warmth of the sun, the soil beneath their nails, and the heavy satisfaction of full baskets. Some even laughed softly as they worked, remembering the villages they had once called home. In the evenings they returned tired but strangely content. This was not degradation, it was something entirely different. The camp canteen soon became a symbol of their confusion. With their wages they bought chocolate, cigarettes, and jars of jam. The first time Anna bit into a Hershey bar, sweetness flooded her tongue like a forgotten dream. She turned away, ashamed of her tears. A girl from Bremen smeared red lipstick across her lips and stared at her reflection, whispering, "I feel human again," as though confessing guilt. But even as they tasted small joys, letters from home kept arriving, filled with hunger and despair. One mother wrote, "If only we had your American bread. Your brother starves." Around her silence fell heavy, broken only by the scratching of rats beneath the bunks. The women sat motionless on the barracks floorboards, letters clutched in their hands and trays of untouched food before them, the shame of abundance burning in their throats. Even the Americans noticed the contradiction. Some guards were surprised to see the German women gaining weight, their cheeks filling out, their hair regaining its shine. "They're better fed than folks back home," one soldier murmured, half in resentment, half in disbelief. Yet rules were rules, and the Geneva Convention demanded standards of care that often surpassed the conditions in war-torn Europe. The irony was clear to everyone. Still, suspicion lingered. At night, whispers slipped through the bunks. What if this kindness was a trap? Some women hoarded bread crusts under mattresses, fearing that tomorrow the cruelty would begin. But as the weeks turned to months, the rhythm of American order wore down even the most distrustful. There were no beatings, no punishments beyond monotony. The greatest cruelty, it seemed, was to be treated with decency. Anna's diary captured this torment with piercing honesty. "I eat and my stomach thanks me. I sleep and my body grows strong. Yet each kindness cuts me deeper. How can I accept this when children in Munich drink water for supper?" Her words spoke for many hearts caught in a silent war between gratitude and guilt. To be brutalized would have been easier. To be dignified by the enemy was unbearable. Yet small encounters deepened the confusion. One night, during roll call, a guard dropped his flashlight. Anna bent instinctively to retrieve it, Their fingers brushed, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. Another day, a soldier passed the laundry humming an American tune. A girl from Cologne recognized it and joined in, laughter bridging the gulf of war for a single breath. Not all guards were kind. Some looked at the women with open disdain, haunted by brothers lost in Europe, but their anger rarely turned to violence. The prisoners existed in a limbo between punishment and reprieve, uneasy and unable to ground themselves in hatred. When they were finally taken beyond the wire for work in nearby towns, they were stunned. The truck rolled through bright American streets lined with shops full of goods, children playing freely, men reading newspapers on quiet porches untouched by bombs. The air smelled of bakeries, cars gleamed in sunlight, movie posters covered brick walls. For women whose last memories of Germany were of ruins and ash, the sight was overwhelming. America was not just standing, it was thriving. That night, the barracks buzzed with disbelief. Did you see the cars? The white bread? The houses untouched? Some found it intoxicating, others unbearable. The enemy had delivered the world their Reich had promised and failed to build. It was a truth too heavy to swallow. The real battle was now within, loyalty against reality, pride against gratitude, hatred against reluctant admiration. Every bar of chocolate, every hot shower, every unbroken street chipped away at the illusion of German superiority. The women began to understand that the Reich had not only deceived them, it had stolen their very vision of the world. As night fell, Anna lay awake, thinking of her mother in Munich boiling weeds for supper, of her ruined office, of the American guard's nod, the taste of melting chocolate, the clean water streaming down her back. Between these memories stretched an abyss she could not yet cross, but something inside her was changing. When dawn gilded the barbed wire in gold, the women understood that survival was no longer the only struggle. Now they had to face what captivity had revealed about their enemy, their homeland, and themselves. Autumn leaves drifted across the camp yard, time passing not by calendars but by the rhythm of meals, work, and letters. Beneath that routine, something profound was taking root. They had survived the shock of kindness. Now came the harder reckoning, what it meant for who they were and who they might become. One evening, Anna sat on the barrack steps, her diary open on her knees, the light fading. Her words came sharp and urgent. I have eaten more in captivity than in all the winters of the Reich. I have slept without fear of bombs, yet my heart is not at peace. What kind of world is this, where the enemy shows more dignity than our own? Her handwriting trembled as laughter echoed nearby, women trading candy and teasing each other about lipstick, their joy almost normal. Anna envied them but could not join. Her loyalty to her shattered homeland still clung to her like a weight she could not cast off. Meanwhile, the guards too began to change. They no longer saw enemies but individuals, frail, confused, sometimes even endearing in their clumsy English. And so both sides, captors and captives alike, found themselves slowly humanized by the very war that was meant to divide them. The guards sometimes shared cigarettes, passing them silently across the wire, a small act of humanity that transcended politics. Yet for every quiet kindness, a distance remained. These were still enemies, still prisoners, still reminders of loved ones lost overseas. The camp never shed its tension. It only softened under the weight of routine. But it was outside the wire that the most profound revelations took place. The women were now sent more often into nearby American towns for labor, picking cotton, working in canneries, or tending municipal parks. Under watch but with unexpected freedom, they encountered a world that seemed impossibly whole. Townsfolk observed them with curiosity, sometimes cold, sometimes warm, often indifferent. Children pointed, shopkeepers stared, but what struck the women most was the normalcy. American life continued untouched. Cinemas glowed at dusk, grocery stores overflowed, radios hummed with jazz and baseball scores. For women from cities turned to rubble, the sight was almost unbearable. One day, after long hours harvesting, Anna's group was offered lunch in a church hall by local volunteers. The tables overflowed with sandwiches, fruit, and pie. The women hesitated, their hands trembling above the plates as though the food might vanish. An elderly woman, flour on her apron, urged gently, "Eat, eat." Anna bit into an apple crisp, sweet, and tears filled her eyes. She had not tasted fruit since 1942. Across the table another whispered, "This is paradise." But Anna only stared at the apple's pale flesh, hearing her mother's voice from memory, "Save the peel for soup." The contrast shattered her. That night in the barracks, talk turned heavier. They spoke of families in cellars, of barefoot children, of brothers dead on the Eastern Front. Some began to voice what had long been unspeakable, that their nation had lied to them, had led them not to glory, but to ruin. "We were told they were beasts," one murmured, "but who are the beasts now? Those who bombed our homes, or those who built this world of plenty?" No one answered. Silence carried the truth too heavily for words. Guilt was not their only burden. Gratitude, too, unsettled them. They were prisoners, yet alive, clean and fed. They had expected humiliation, but instead found dignity. The soap, the showers, the chocolate, each felt like more than comfort, like something moral. Was it mercy, hypocrisy, or simply a civilization still holding to rules their Reich had abandoned? Each woman wrestled privately with these questions, unable to resolve them, yet unable to look away. In her diary, Anna wrote, "It would be easier to hate. Hatred is a fortress. It keeps the world out. But what they give us, bread, soap, music, it slips past the walls. It makes them human. And if they are human, then what becomes of all the blood, all the ruins, all the lies we swallowed?" When she closed her diary that night, her chest ached with something like betrayal. The guards sensed the shift. They watched the women laugh during American films played in makeshift camp cinemas, saw them hum along awkwardly but earnestly to songs on the radio. "You'd forget they were the enemy," one sergeant said, "if you didn't look at the uniforms." The remark carried equal parts warning and wonder. War demanded clear lines, but life blurred them. Yet the greatest shock wasn't in the food, or the work, or the glimpses of intact towns. It was in the mirror. The women's faces filled out, color returned to their cheeks, hair regained its shine. Some even looked younger, as though captivity had peeled back the years of war. To see themselves restored was almost unbearable. It forced them to confront the truth. The enemy had made them healthy. Their own nation had made them starve. It was not just revelation, it was indictment. Still, despite the laughter and routine, unease lingered. They knew captivity could not last. Someday they would be sent home to ruins, hunger, and memories. The thought of leaving abundance for ashes filled many with dread. More than one whispered, "I am afraid to go back." It was treasonous to feel, yet undeniable. As winter neared, rumors spread of repatriation. The barracks grew tense. Would their families recognize them, well-fed, clean, faces glowing with the health of captivity? Some feared the silent judgment of mothers who had starved while they survived. One night, Anna stared at her diary and finally wrote the truth she had buried. "I fear leaving more than I feared arriving." The admission chilled her, but it was honest, for the enemy's greatest weapon had not been guns or bombs, it had been soap, food and dignity, and those simple things had done what hatred never could. One frosted morning, the announcement came, a transport was leaving. The women gathered, hearts pounding, eyes wide with questions no one dared to ask. To return meant hunger, rubble, ghosts. To stay meant captivity, but also life. As names were read, each syllable cracked like thunder in the cold air. When Anna heard her own, she stepped forward into the pale morning light and understood that the real war was no longer between nations, it was within her, in the place where hatred had once lived and where something fragile, dangerous, and irreversibly human had begun to grow.